She stood in the sterile white hallway of the most prestigious private hospital in Dubai, her surgical scrubs pristine, her hands steady as granite. Dr. Amara Okafor had travelled 8,000 miles and 15 years to get here. The same man who had once looked at her like she was nothing more than dust on his expensive shoes now lay unconscious on an operating table, his life hanging by the thinnest of threads. His family surrounded her, begging, pleading, offering millions for her to save him. The irony wasn't lost on her. The poor girl from Lagos, who had once served him tea in his father's office, who had been humiliated and cast aside like garbage, was now the only person on earth who could keep his heart beating. But this story isn't just about revenge or redemption. It's about what happens when destiny takes two people who were never supposed to meet again and places them in a room where only one of them holds the power of life and death. What happened next will challenge everything you think you know about forgiveness, second chances, and the price of pride. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling compound of the Okafor family home, though calling it a home was generous. The small concrete structure with its rusted tin roof and cracked walls housed 12 people across 3 rooms. Amara Okafor woke before dawn, as she had every day for the past 3 years, to the sound of her younger siblings stirring on the thin mattresses they shared on the floor. At 17, Amara had already learned that survival required precision. Every movement, every decision, every breath had to serve a purpose. While her friends her age were worrying about boys and school dances, Amara was calculating how to stretch a bag of rice to feed a family for 2 weeks and studying by candlelight until her eyes burned. Her father, Samuel Okafor, had been a brilliant engineer before the economic collapse took his job and his hope in the same devastating sweep. Now he spent his days sitting on the front step, staring at nothing, his hands shaking from whatever he drank to forget. Her mother, Grace, worked 16-hour days as a cleaner in the wealthy district of Victoria Island, her back permanently bent from years of scrubbing floors on her hands and knees. But Amara refused to accept that this was her destiny. Education is the only ladder out of this pit, she would whisper to herself every morning as she prepared for another day of juggling school, work, and keeping her family from falling apart completely. Her grades were flawless, her determination unshakable, and her dream crystal clear. She would become a doctor, no matter what it took. The opportunity came through Mrs. Hassan, her chemistry teacher, who had noticed Amara's exceptional performance. Despite her circumstances, there was a program, she explained, a cultural exchange that brought promising African students to work in wealthy Middle Eastern households while attending local schools. The families sponsored their education in exchange for domestic help. "It's not easy, Amara," Mrs. Hassan had warned, her weathered face serious. "You'll be far from home, working for people who may not see your worth. But if you can endure it, if you can prove yourself, there are scholarships, opportunities, a real chance at university." Amara didn't hesitate. The next month, she was on a plane to Dubai, carrying nothing but a worn backpack, her school certificates, and a determination that burned brighter than the desert sun she was flying toward. The Al Rashid family mansion in Emirates Hills wasn't just wealthy. It was a monument to excess. Marble imported from Italy covered floors that stretched like frozen lakes. Crystal chandeliers hung like captured stars from ceilings so high they seemed to touch the sky. Gardens sprawled across perfectly manicured acres, complete with fountains that danced in synchronized patterns. Amara's first day was overwhelming. The head housekeeper, a stern Lebanese woman named Fatima, gave her a rapid tour while listing her duties. Cook breakfast for the family, serve meals, clean the main living areas, iron clothes, study only after all work was complete. The family has 3 sons, Fatima explained as they walked through hallways lined with expensive artwork. Omar is in London at university. Khalil is finishing his final year at the American University here in Dubai. And then there's Hassan. Something in Fatima's tone when she said the name Hassan made Amara look up. Hassan is complicated, Fatima continued carefully. He's the youngest at 22, but he's already being groomed to take over portions of the family business. Empire. He's brilliant, but he can be, she paused, searching for the right word, demanding. Amara nodded, making mental notes. She had dealt with difficult people before. How hard could it be? She found out the next morning. Hassan al-Rashid entered the breakfast room like he owned not just the house, but the very air inside it. Tall, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they looked at, he moved, with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His suit probably cost more than Amara's family made in a year. And when he looked at her, it was like looking through glass. "You're the new girl?" he said, not as a question but as a statement. His English was perfect, accent crisp and educated. "Yes, sir, I'm Amara." She kept her voice steady, professional. He didn't acknowledge her introduction. Instead, he sat at the massive dining table and began scrolling through his phone. Coffee, black, the usual breakfast, and make sure the newspapers are properly arranged, business section on top. For the next 6 months, this became their routine. Amara would serve his meals, clean his spaces, prepare his clothes, all while he treated her like a piece of furniture. He never asked her name again, never said please or thank you, never looked at her as anything more than a service to be used. But Amara was watching him and learning. She noticed how he worked late into the night, papers spread across his desk as he analyzed market reports and business proposals. She saw the pressure he was under from his father, the way his jaw would tighten during the shouting matches that echoed from the patriarch's office. She observed his brilliance, the way he could look at a complex financial document and immediately identify problems that others missed. What she didn't expect was to find herself fascinated by his mind, even as his treatment of her remained coldly indifferent. The first crack in their dynamic came on a rainy Thursday evening in March. Amara was collecting dishes from his study when she noticed he was struggling with a complex equation, something related to logistics and cost optimization. For one of the family's shipping routes, the papers were scattered, his calculator abandoned, and for the first time since she'd known him, Hassan al-Rashid looked frustrated. Without thinking, Amara glanced at the problem. The solution was actually elegant once you approached it from a different angle, using a method she'd learned in her advanced mathematics class. "The variable coefficient is wrong," she said quietly, then immediately froze, realizing she had spoken. Hassan's head snapped up. "What did you say?" Amara's heart pounded. She could apologize, pretend she hadn't said anything, retreat back into invisibility. Instead, something inside her refused to back down. "The equation you're working on, you're treating the shipping volume as a constant, but it should be variable based on seasonal fluctuations. If you adjust for that and use differential calculus to account for the changing variables, the optimization becomes much clearer." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Hassan stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You understand logistics mathematics?" His voice was different now, curious rather than dismissive. "I understand mathematics," Amara replied simply. "The application doesn't change the principles." Hassan set down his pen and really looked at her. "You're in school here?" "Yes, Dubai, International Academy. Final year. Your grades?" First in my class, something shifted in Hassan's expression. Not warmth exactly, but recognition, like he was recalibrating his assessment of who she was. "Show me," he said, pushing the papers toward her. For the next hour, Amara worked through the problem while Hassan watched intently. She could feel his eyes on her as she calculated, adjusted variables, and found the optimal solution. When she finished, she had saved his family's company an estimated 2.3 million dirhams annually on that single shipping route. "Where did you learn this?" Hassan asked, his voice soft with something that might have been respect. "Books, online courses. My mathematics teacher back home said I had a gift for problem solving." Amara met his gaze directly. "Being poor doesn't make you stupid, Mr. Al-Rashid." It was the first time she had ever challenged him directly, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, surprise, perhaps even admiration. From that night forward, their relationship began to change. Hassan started asking her opinion on problems he was working on. He would leave complex documents on the table where she could see them, then casually ask what she thought. Their conversations grew longer, more substantive. Amara found herself looking forward to these intellectual exchanges, and she began to see glimpses of the man beneath the privileged exterior. Hassan was under enormous pressure to prove himself worthy of the family legacy. He worked harder than anyone else in the house, driven by a need to earn what others assumed he was simply given. But the real shift came 3 months later, on a warm evening in June. Hassan had been working on a particularly challenging acquisition deal, and the stress was showing. He'd barely eaten, barely slept, and Amara could see the exhaustion in his eyes when she brought him his evening tea. "You need to rest," she said gently, setting the cup down beside his stack of documents. "I can't. The presentation is tomorrow, and if I don't get this right—" He trailed off, rubbing his temples. Without asking permission, Amara sat down across from him. "Tell me about it." Hassan looked up, surprised by her boldness, but instead of dismissing her, he began to explain the complexities of the deal. As he talked, Amara listened intently, asking pointed questions that helped him clarify his thinking. "You're overthinking it," she said finally. "The solution isn't in the numbers. It's in understanding what the other party really wants. They're not just selling a company, they're selling their legacy. Speak to that." Hassan stared at her for a long moment. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. "How did someone so young become so wise?" "Necessity," Amara replied with a small smile. "When you have nothing, you learn to see everything clearly." That night, something fundamental shifted between them. The barriers of class and culture began to feel less insurmountable. Hassan started staying later in the evenings, not to work, but to talk with Amara. They discussed books, philosophy, dreams for the future. She told him about her family back in Lagos, her determination to become a doctor. He shared his fears about living up to his father's expectations, his desire to modernize the family business. Their conversations became the highlight of both their days. Hassan would find excuses to be in whatever room Amara was working in. She would linger longer than necessary when serving his meals, hoping for a chance to continue their discussions from the night before. It was dangerous territory for both of them, and they both knew it. The unspoken tension grew with each passing day, each meaningful glance, each moment when their hands would brush as she set down his coffee cup. The breaking point came on a sweltering afternoon in late July. Hassan's parents were away on business. The other staff had left for the day, and the house felt electric with possibility. Amara was in the library, dusting shelves, while Hassan worked at the desk behind her. "Amara," he said suddenly. She turned, and the intensity in his eyes made Her breath catch. "I need to tell you something," he continued, standing up and walking toward her. "These past months, getting to know you, seeing your brilliant mind, your strength, I've never met anyone like you." Amara's heart raced. She knew where this was heading, and every rational part of her screamed that it was impossible, dangerous, foolish. "Hassan," she began, but he stepped closer. "I know this is complicated. I know the obstacles we'd face, but I can't pretend I don't feel this anymore." His voice was raw with honesty. "I'm falling in love with you, Amara." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them could cross. Amara felt her resolve wavering. She had been fighting her own growing feelings for weeks, telling herself it was just intellectual attraction, nothing more. "We can't," she whispered, but even as she said it, she didn't step away. "Why not?" Hassan moved closer still, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. "Because of what people will say, because of money, status. None of that matters to me." For a moment, Amara allowed herself to imagine it, a world where love could conquer the vast gulf between their circumstances, where the brilliant, ambitious girl from Lagos could stand beside the heir to a business empire and be seen as an equal. But reality crashed back like a cold wave. "It matters to everyone else," she said, taking a step back. "Your family, your community, your future, they all depend on you making the right choice. And I'm not the right choice, Hassan. We both know that." Hassan's face fell, but before he could argue, the sound of car doors slamming in the driveway shattered the moment. His parents were home early. They sprang apart, both breathing heavily, the weight of what had almost happened settling between them like a wall. As Amara hurried back to her duties and Hassan returned to his desk, neither of them noticed the figure standing in the doorway, having witnessed the entire exchange. Khalil al-Rashid, Hassan's older brother, had seen everything, and the expression on his face promised that this moment of vulnerability would not remain a secret for long. The foundation they had been building, fragile as it was about to be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next 3 days passed in excruciating tension. Hassan and Amara barely spoke, their conversations reduced to polite exchanges about schedules and meals, but the electricity between them hadn't diminished. If anything, it had intensified. Every accidental touch, every shared glance carried the weight of unspoken words and suppressed desires. Khalil watched them both like a predator circling wounded prey. He said nothing, did nothing, but his presence felt ominous. Hassan noticed his brother's increased attention, the way Khalil's eyes followed Amara around the house, the subtle smirk that played at the corners of his mouth during family dinners. Amara threw herself into her studies with renewed determination, staying up until the early hours of the morning, hunched over medical textbooks she'd borrowed from the local library. Her final exams were approaching, and she had received promising correspondence from several universities. The University of Edinburgh had expressed serious interest in her application, particularly after she'd submitted a research paper on innovative surgical techniques in resource-limited settings. "Your work shows exceptional promise," the admissions director had written. "We would very much like to discuss a full scholarship opportunity, including living expenses." It was everything she had dreamed of, the golden ticket out of her circumstances, and into the medical career she'd worked so desperately to achieve. But now, with her feelings for Hassan complicating everything, the prospect of leaving Dubai felt both like salvation and heartbreak. Hassan, meanwhile, was drowning in his own turmoil. The acquisition deal he'd been working on had succeeded brilliantly, largely due to Amara's insights about appealing to the seller's emotional investment. His father had been impressed, finally showing the approval Hassan had craved his entire life, but the victory felt hollow when he couldn't share it with the person who had made it possible. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when Hassan's parents announced they would be hosting a grand dinner party the following weekend. It was to be a celebration of Hassan's successful business deal and an opportunity to introduce him to potential marriage prospects from other prominent families. The Al Maktoum family will be attending, his mother Layla announced over dinner, her voice bright with satisfaction. Their daughter Yasmin is 21, educated in Switzerland, and quite beautiful. I think you two would make an excellent match. Hassan's fork clattered against his plate. Mother, I've told you I'm not ready. For marriage? Nonsense, his father, Omar Sr., interjected. You're 22, you've proven yourself in business, and it's time to think about the family legacy. The Al Maktoums have been friends for decades, and uniting our families would be beneficial for everyone. Khalil leaned back in his chair, that knowing smirk returning. Besides, Hassan, you can't wait forever for the right woman to fall into your lap. Sometimes love comes in unexpected packages. The subtle emphasis on his words made Hassan's blood run cold. His brother knew. The question was what Khalil intended to do with that knowledge. Later that evening, as Amara was cleaning the dining room, Hassan found her alone. We need to talk, he said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. Amara continued polishing the silverware, not looking up. I don't think that's wise. Khalil knows, her hands stilled. Knows what? About us. About what happened. In the library. He was watching. Amara set down the silver serving spoon, her composure finally cracking. There is no us, Hassan. There can't be. But there is. Hassan moved closer, his voice urgent. What I feel for you isn't going away. If anything, it's getting stronger. Then you need to make it go away. Amara's voice was firm, but Hassan could hear the pain underneath. Your parents are planning your future with someone appropriate, someone who fits into your world. I don't want their world if you're not in it. The words hung between them, raw and desperate. Amara finally looked up, and Hassan saw tears glistening in her eyes. You think love is enough? She asked softly. You think we can overcome the fact that I serve your food, clean your room, and come from a family so poor we sometimes went days without eating? You think your parents will welcome me with open arms? That your business partners will respect you with a black African wife who used to be your servant? Each word hit Hassan like a physical blow because he knew she was right, but his heart refused to accept it. We could leave, he said desperately. Start somewhere new, away from all this. Amara smiled sadly. And give up everything you've worked for. Your family's empire, your father's approval. I won't be the reason you destroy your life, Hassan. Before Hassan could respond, they heard footsteps in the corridor. They sprang apart just as Khalil appeared in the doorway. How touching, Khalil said, his voice dripping with mock sentiment. Though I have to say, little brother, your timing could be better. Father is looking for you. Something about reviewing the guest list for Saturday's dinner. Hassan shot his brother a warning look, but had no choice but to leave. As he passed Khalil, his older brother leaned in close. We should talk soon, Khalil whispered, about appropriate behavior and family reputation. That night, Hassan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing that his world was about to come crashing down. He was right. The next morning, Hassan was summoned to his father's study. Omar Sr. was seated behind his massive mahogany desk, Khalil standing beside him with his arms crossed. The atmosphere was glacial. Sit down, Hassan, his father commanded. Hassan took the chair across from the desk, his heart hammering in his chest. Your brother has brought some disturbing information to my attention, Omar Sr. began, his voice deadly calm. Information about inappropriate relationships being conducted under my roof. Hassan's mouth went dry. Father, I can explain. Explain. What? That my son, the heir to the Al-Rashid legacy, has been carrying on with the help. That you've forgotten your position, your responsibilities, your duty to this family. The contempt in his father's voice was like acid. Hassan had never seen him this angry, not even during their worst business disagreements. Her name is Amara, Hassan said quietly, and she's not just the help. She's brilliant, accomplished, stronger than anyone I've ever met. She's a servant, Omar Sr. roared, slamming his hand on the desk. A girl we took in out of charity, and this is how she repays our kindness? By seducing my son? She didn't seduce anyone. If anything, I pursued her. Enough! Omar Sr. stood up, his face flushed with rage. I will not have the Al-Rashid name dragged through the mud by some gold-digging African girl who has clearly calculated how to trap a wealthy husband. That's not what this is, Hassan protested, standing as well. She doesn't want my money. She's never asked for anything. Then she's smarter than I gave her credit for, Khalil interjected coldly. Playing the long game, making you think. It was your idea. Hassan turned on his brother with fury. You know nothing about her character. I know she needs to go. Omar Sr. cut him off. Today, I want her out of this house and out of Dubai. I've already made the arrangements. Hassan felt the world tilt beneath his feet. You can't do this. I can and I will. The girl will be on a flight back to Lagos tonight. Her student visa has been revoked, her employment terminated, and she is banned from re-entering the UAE. Father, please. The decision is final, Hassan, and if you ever try to contact her or follow her, I will cut you off completely. No inheritance, no position in the company, no family support. You will be dead to me. The threat hung in the air like a death sentence. Hassan stared at his father, seeing a stranger, a man who could destroy a young woman's dreams without a second thought, who valued reputation over his own son's happiness. You're making a mistake, Hassan said quietly. No, Omar Sr. replied, his voice cold as winter. I'm fixing one. 2 hours later, Hassan found Amara in her small room, packing her few belongings into the same worn backpack she'd arrived with. Her face was composed, but he could see the devastation in her eyes. Amara, I'm so sorry. I'll fix this. I'll find a way. No! Her voice was steady but final. It's over, Hassan. It was always going to end this way. I could leave with you. We could start over somewhere else. Amara turned to face him fully, and the pain in her expression nearly brought him to his knees. And then what? You become nothing so I can have something? You destroy your life for a dream that can never work? She shook her head. I won't let you do that. So that's it. You're just going to walk away. I'm going to remember that some bridges are meant to be burned. Amara picked up her backpack and moved toward the door. Your father was right about one thing. I don't belong in your world. I never did. Amara, please. She stopped at the doorway and looked back at him one last time. Forget me, Hassan. Marry the Swiss-educated girl. Take over your father's empire. Live the life you were born for. And maybe someday, when you're old and surrounded by everything money can buy, you'll remember the poor girl from Lagos who loved you enough to walk away. Hassan watched her leave, feeling like his heart was being torn from his chest. He wanted to run after her, to fight for her, to damn the consequences and choose love over everything else. But he didn't. He stood frozen in that empty room, listening to the sound of her footsteps growing fainter until the front door closed with a finality that echoed through the mansion like a gunshot. That evening, as Amara's plane lifted off from Dubai International Airport, Hassan sat in his room, staring out at the city lights, wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He would spend the next 15 years finding out. In her cramped economy seat, flying toward an uncertain future, Amara pressed her face against the small window and watched the glittering city fade into darkness. She had lost the man she loved, but she hadn't lost her dreams. Edinburgh University was still waiting. Her acceptance letter was in her backpack, along with the scholarship that would change everything. She would become a doctor, just as she'd always planned. She would save lives, help people, make a difference in the world. And maybe if she worked hard enough and climbed high enough, she would never again be powerless in the face of wealth and privilege. The girl who had served tea in Hassan al-Rashid's mansion was gone forever. In her place, a woman was being born, one who would never again bow to anyone. What neither of them knew was that fate had its own plans, and 15 years later, their paths would cross again in the most unexpected and devastating way possible. The day's cold Scottish air bit through Amara's thin jacket as she stood outside the imposing Gothic revival buildings of Edinburgh University's medical school. 3 months had passed since she'd left Dubai, and the transition from luxury mansion to cramped student accommodation had been jarring. But she welcomed the discomfort. It reminded her that she was building something entirely her own. Her dorm, room in Pollock Halls, was barely larger than the closet she'd had at the Al-Rashid house, shared with a chatty engineering student named Sophie from Manchester. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Where she'd once served meals on china plates worth more than her family's monthly income, she now survived on instant noodles and whatever part-time job she could find between classes. But Amara had never been happier. "You're mental, Sophie," said one evening, watching Amara study anatomy textbooks at 2 in the morning while Sophie struggled to finish a basic physics assignment. "When do you sleep?" "Sleep is for people who have time to waste," Amara replied without looking up from the detailed diagram of the cardiovascular system she was memorizing. "I have 15 years to catch up on." What Sophie didn't understand, what none of her classmates understood, was that every page Amara studied was an act of rebellion. Every perfect grade was a declaration of war against a system that had deemed her unworthy. Every surgical technique she mastered was armor against a world that had taught her that her dreams were too big for someone like her. Her professors quickly noticed her exceptional dedication. Dr. Margaret Sinclair, the formidable head of cardiovascular surgery, called Amara to her office after a particularly challenging examination that Amara had aced while half the class failed. "Miss Okafor," Dr. Sinclair said, removing her reading glasses and studying Amara with sharp blue eyes. "You scored higher on this exam than any student I've taught in 25 years. Where did you learn surgical anatomy at this level?" "Books, mostly," Amara replied honestly. "I've been reading medical journals since I was 15. "Self-taught." Dr. Sinclair raised an eyebrow. "Impressive. Tell me, what draws you to cardiac surgery specifically?" Amara hesitated. The truth was complicated, that she was drawn to hearts because hers had been broken, that she wanted to master the organ that had caused her so much pain. Instead, she said, "Hearts don't lie, Professor. When a heart is damaged, you can see exactly what's wrong and fix it. It's honest work." Dr. Sinclair studied her for a long moment. "I'm starting a special research program next semester, advanced cardiac techniques, experimental procedures. It's typically reserved for third-year students, but I'd like you to consider joining." It was an unprecedented opportunity, and Amara knew it. What would it involve? Long hours, intensive study. You'd be working directly with me on groundbreaking research into minimally invasive cardiac repair. It could accelerate your education significantly, but it would also mean sacrificing any semblance of a normal university experience. Amara didn't hesitate. "When do I start?" Hassan's life had become a carefully orchestrated performance. He attended the dinner party his parents had planned, charmed Yasmin Al-Maktoum with polite conversation about art and literature, and played the role of the dutiful son perfectly. To outside observers, he was thriving. His business acumen was proving exceptional, his social connections were expanding, and his engagement to Yasmin was announced 6 months after Amara's departure. But inside, he was hollow. He threw himself into work with an intensity that worried even his demanding father. Hassan's innovations in logistics and international trade were revolutionizing the family business, expanding their operations across 3 continents. By age 25, he was running half the company's operations, respected by competitors, twice his age, and featured on the covers of business magazines throughout the Middle East. Yet every success felt like betrayal. Every achievement reminded him of the conversations he'd shared with Amara, the way her insights had shaped his thinking, the brilliance she'd shown that his world had refused to recognize. His engagement to Yasmin was comfortable but passionless. She was everything his family wanted: beautiful, educated, well-connected, and utterly uninterested in challenging him intellectually. Their conversations skimmed the surface of everything, touching on social events, travel plans, and wedding preparations, but never diving into the depths that Amara had fearlessly explored. "You're distracted," Yasmin commented one evening over dinner at one of Dubai's most exclusive restaurants. "You've barely said a word all night." Hassan looked across the table at his fiancée, with her perfectly styled hair and designer dress, and felt nothing. "Sorry, just thinking about the Singapore expansion." "Always work," Yasmin sighed. "When we're married, I hope you'll learn to leave the office at the office." Hassan nodded absently, but he was thinking about Amara's words from years ago. Being poor doesn't make you stupid. Yasmin's assumption that business complexity was something to be left behind rather than engaged with highlighted everything that was missing from their relationship. 3 years into her medical studies, Amara had transformed. The shy girl who had once served tea in a Dubai mansion was gone, replaced by a woman who commanded respect in operating theatres and lecture halls alike. Her research with Dr. Sinclair had resulted in 2 published papers in prestigious medical journals, an almost unheard-of achievement for an undergraduate student. "You've developed a technique that could revolutionize how we approach complex cardiac repairs," Dr. Sinclair told her as they reviewed their latest research findings. "This minimally invasive approach you've designed could reduce patient recovery time by 60%. Amara studied the surgical diagrams they'd been working on, her diagrams, her innovations. "It's still theoretical. We need clinical trials. Real patients, which is why I'm recommending you for the joint program with Johns Hopkins," Dr. Sinclair interrupted. "Full scholarship, accelerated track to specialize in cardiac surgery. You'd be working with the best surgeons in the world, Dr. Okafor." The name felt strange on her professor's lips. Amara had grown into it, earned it through countless sleepless nights and unwavering determination. She was no longer the girl who cleaned floors. She was becoming Dr. Amara Okafor, and the title carried weight. But success came with its own challenges. The more prominent she became in her field, the more isolated she felt personally. Relationships were difficult when you were constantly studying, researching, innovating. Her fellow students found her intensity intimidating, her focus alien. "You never relax," complained David, a fellow medical student who'd been trying unsuccessfully to ask her out for months. "When was the last time you went to a pub, saw a film, did anything that wasn't related to cardiac surgery?" Amara looked up from the medical journal she was reading. "When was the last time you developed a surgical technique that could save thousands of lives?" David laughed uncomfortably. "Right, but you're missing out on your youth, Amara. What's driving you so The question hit deeper than he'd intended. What was driving her? Was it ambition? Or was it the memory of a man who had loved her mind but couldn't overcome the barriers his world had built? Was she becoming a surgeon to save lives, or to prove that she was worthy of a love she'd been denied? She didn't answer David's question, but she knew the truth. Every surgery she mastered was a step closer to a version of herself that no one could dismiss, diminish, or send away. Hassan's wedding to Yasmin was the social event of the season. 300 guests, a venue that had been transformed into a palatial wonderland, and coverage in every major society publication across the Gulf. Hassan played his part perfectly, smiling for photographs, accepting congratulations, dancing with his bride as flashbulbs captured their supposed happiness. But as he held Yasmin in his arms during their first dance, Hassan found himself remembering another moment, years ago, when he'd almost kissed a girl in a library who had challenged everything he thought he knew about worth and value. "You look handsome," Yasmin whispered as they swayed to the music. "Thank you," Hassan replied automatically, but his mind was elsewhere. Where was Amara now? Had she achieved her dreams? Was she happy? Did she ever think of him? The marriage settled into a predictable rhythm. Yasmin focused on charity galas and social climbing, while Hassan immersed himself deeper into business. They were cordial, even affectionate in public, but there was no passion, no intellectual fire, no sense that they were building something meaningful together. 2 years into the marriage, Yasmin became pregnant. Hassan was genuinely excited about becoming a father, hoping that a child might bring the emotional connection that had been missing from their relationship. But even as he felt the baby kick against Yasmin's belly, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was living someone else's life. At Johns Hopkins, Amara's reputation as a surgical prodigy was cementing. She was working 18-hour days, assisting in complex operations, developing new techniques and saving lives that others had given up on. Her peers called her the machine for her precision and stamina, but Dr. Elizabeth Carter, her attending surgeon, saw something else. "You operate like you're angry," Dr. Carter observed, after Amara had successfully completed a particularly challenging procedure on a young boy with a congenital heart defect. Amara was washing her hands, her movements sharp and controlled. "I operate like I care about the outcome." "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Dr. Carter replied gently. "But anger can make you reckless. What are you so angry about?" For a moment, Amara's composure cracked. "I'm angry that this boy almost died because his family couldn't afford the surgery he needed. I'm angry that excellence isn't enough if you don't have the right connections. I'm angry that people are dying while others debate whether they're worth saving." Dr. Carter nodded slowly. "Channel that anger, Dr. Okafor. Use it to make you better, not bitter. The world needs surgeons who fight for the forgotten." That night, Amara stood on the roof of the hospital, looking out over Baltimore's skyline. She had become everything she'd dreamed of and more. In 2 years, she would complete her residency and become one of the youngest cardiac surgeons in the country. She had offers from prestigious hospitals, research opportunities that could change medicine, and a reputation that opened doors she'd never imagined. But success had come at a cost. She was 31 years old, utterly alone, and driven by a fury that seemed to grow stronger with each achievement. The girl who had once believed in love had been replaced by a woman who believed only in her own ability to survive and excel. What she didn't know was that thousands of miles away, in a Dubai hospital, Hassan al-Rashid was lying unconscious after a massive heart attack, his life hanging by a thread. The best cardiac surgeons in the Middle East had declared his condition too complex, too risky to operate on. But his family wasn't giving up. They were searching for the most innovative cardiac surgeon in the world, someone who specialized in the impossible cases that others wouldn't touch. They were searching for Dr. Amara Okafor. The girl Hassan had lost was about to return as the only woman who could save his life, and this time she would hold all the power. Dr. Amara Okafor stood in Operating Theatre 7, her hands steady as steel as she performed her third cardiac surgery of the day. The patient was a 60-year-old construction worker whose insurance had been denied coverage for the complex procedure by 3 different hospitals. To them, Miguel Santos was a liability, a high-risk case not worth the potential complications. To Amara, he was exactly the kind of patient she'd dedicated her life to saving. Sutures holding beautifully, Dr. Okafor, her surgical resident, Dr. James Park, observed as Amara completed the intricate valve replacement using her own innovative technique. Recovery time should be half the standard duration. Amara nodded, focused entirely on the delicate work before her. At 39, she had become one of the most sought-after cardiac surgeons in the world, known for taking cases that others deemed impossible. Her patient survival rate was unprecedented. Her techniques were being taught in medical schools globally, and her research had fundamentally changed how the medical community approached complex heart conditions. But more than technical skill, what set Dr. Okafor apart was her philosophy. Every life was worth saving, regardless of the patient's ability to pay, their social status, or the complexity of their condition. It was a principle that had made her wealthy hospitals' most valuable asset and their most expensive surgeon to employ. Dr. Okafor, her surgical coordinator Maria, appeared in the doorway of the OR prep room, where Amara was washing up after Miguel's successful surgery. "There's an urgent call from Dubai. They're requesting your immediate consultation on an emergency case." Amara paused, her hands still under the flowing water. She hadn't heard the name Dubai spoken aloud in 15 years, and it hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, she was transported back to marble floors and crystal chandeliers, to passionate debates about business strategy and stolen moments in moonlit gardens. "Dr. Okafor?" Maria repeated, concern in her voice. Amara shook off the memories. "What's the nature of the case?" "Massive myocardial infarction with multiple complications. The patient is in critical condition, and according to the Dubai cardiology team, you're the only surgeon they believe can perform the necessary procedure. Patient details." Maria consulted her tablet. 43-year-old male, CEO of a major logistics company. He suffered the heart attack during a board meeting 3 days ago. They've been keeping him stable, but his condition is deteriorating rapidly. Amara's professional mind automatically began processing the medical information, but something cold was settling in her chest. A 43-year-old CEO in Dubai. It couldn't be. "The family is offering $2 million for the consultation. Alone," Maria continued, "plus all expenses and whatever fee you deem appropriate for the surgery." The money meant nothing to Amara. She already had more than she could spend in several lifetimes. But the desperation behind such an offer told her everything she needed to know about the patient's condition. "Send me the medical files," she said finally. "I'll review them tonight." That evening, in her penthouse apartment overlooking Baltimore's inner harbor, Amara sat at her desk with the Dubai case files spread before her. The CT scans, blood work, and cardiac monitoring data painted a grim picture: massive tissue damage, multiple blockages, structural complications that would require surgical techniques that perhaps only a handful of surgeons worldwide could attempt. But it was the patient information sheet that made her hands tremble. Amara stared at the name until the letters blurred. Hassan. The man who had loved her mind, touched her soul, and then let his family destroy her dreams. The man who had married someone else 6 months after she was exiled from his country. The man she had spent 15 years trying to forget while becoming everything she was today, partly to prove he had been wrong to let her go. Now he was dying, and his family was begging her to save him. The irony was so perfect it felt like destiny. Her phone rang, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. The caller ID showed an international number with a UAE country code. Dr. Okafor speaking. Dr. Okafor, this is Dr. Khalil al-Rashid calling from Dubai. The voice was cultured, desperate, and achingly familiar. I'm the patient's brother, and a physician myself. I cannot express how grateful we are that you're considering taking Hassan's case. Khalil. The brother who had orchestrated her downfall, who had whispered poison in his father's ear and ensured her exile. Now he was calling her, his voice broken with fear and pleading. Dr. al-Rashid, Amara said, her voice professionally neutral. I've reviewed your brother's files. His condition is indeed critical. Yes, we've consulted with the best cardiac teams in Dubai, London, and Geneva. Everyone says the damage is too extensive, the risks too high. You're our last hope. Amara could hear the crack in his voice, the desperation of a man watching his brother die. Part of her, the part that had spent years healing from the wounds his family had inflicted, felt a dark satisfaction at his anguish. The surgery would be extremely complex, she said carefully. Multiple bypass grafts, valve replacement, and reconstruction of severely damaged tissue. Even if successful, recovery would be lengthy and uncertain. But you could do it. You could save him. Could she? Medically, yes. The procedure would be challenging, but it was within her capabilities. The real question was whether she wanted to. I would need to examine the patient personally before making any commitments, Amara said finally. If I agree to take the case, I work under my conditions. No interference from family members, complete authority over medical decisions, and access to whatever resources I require. Anything, Khalil said immediately. Whatever you need. When can you come? Amara looked out at the Baltimore skyline, city lights twinkling like distant stars. 15 years ago, she had been a powerless girl, sent away in shame and defeat. Now she was Dr. Amara Okafor, one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the world, holding the life of the man who had broken her heart in her hands. I can be there tomorrow evening, she said. The Emirates Airlines first-class cabin was luxurious, but Amara barely noticed her surroundings during the 14-hour flight. She spent the time reviewing Hassan's medical files, preparing for what would likely be the most challenging surgery of her career, and trying to fortify herself emotionally for seeing him again. She had changed dramatically since leaving Dubai. The shy, uncertain girl was gone, replaced by a woman who commanded operating rooms and conference halls with equal authority. Her hair was now styled in a sophisticated bob. Her clothes were tailored and expensive, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had earned her place in the world through sheer force of will. But underneath the polished exterior, old wounds were beginning to ache. As the plane descended toward Dubai, Amara looked out at the city that had once been her prison. The skyline had changed dramatically. New towers reaching toward the sky, artificial islands blooming in the blue waters of the Gulf, a metropolis that seemed to reinvent itself with each passing year. She wondered if Hassan had changed as much as his city. A black Mercedes was waiting for her at the airport, driven by a uniformed chauffeur who treated her with the deference reserved for visiting dignitaries. The irony wasn't lost on her. 15 years ago, she would have been the one serving important visitors, invisible and forgettable. The car pulled up to the entrance of Dubai's most prestigious private hospital, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that embodied the city's commitment to medical excellence. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the hospital's chief of staff, was waiting personally to greet her. Dr. Okafor, it's an honor to have you here. Dr. Mitchell said, extending her hand. "Your reputation precedes you. We've prepared everything according to your specifications." As they walked through the hospital corridors, Amara was briefed on Hassan's current condition. He had been unconscious since the previous day, kept alive by machines while his heart struggled to function with massive damage. Time was running out. "The family has been here constantly," Dr. Mitchell mentioned as they approached the cardiac wing. His wife, his father, his brother Dr. Khalil, they're very anxious. They stopped outside the ICU, and through the glass window, Amara saw him. Hassan lay motionless in the hospital bed, connected to multiple monitors and machines. Even unconscious and diminished by illness, he was still recognizably the man she had loved. His hair was now touched with silver at the temples, lines of stress and responsibility etched around his eyes, but his face retained the strong features that had once made her heart race. Standing beside his bed was a woman Amara recognized from society photographs, Yasmin al-Rashid, Hassan's wife. She was elegant even in her distress, holding Hassan's hand while tears traced silent paths down her cheeks. "Dr. Okafor?" Amara turned to find Khalil approaching, and the years fell away like autumn leaves. He was older, more distinguished, but his eyes held the same calculating intelligence she remembered. When he saw her, his face went through a complex series of expressions: recognition, shock, and something that might have been shame. "Amara," he said quietly, dropping the formal address. "Dr. Okafor," she corrected firmly. "I'm here as a surgeon, Dr. al-Rashid. Nothing more." Khalil nodded, chastened. "Of course. Thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult." Before Amara could respond, an older man approached, Omar al-Rashid Sr., Hassan's father. He had aged considerably, his once imposing frame now stooped with worry and exhaustion. When he saw Amara, he stopped mid-stride, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and desperate hope. "You came," he said simply. "I came to evaluate a patient," Amara replied coolly. "Mr. al-Rashid, I'll need to examine your son and review his current treatment plan before I can determine if surgery is possible." The old man who had once called her a gold-digging servant and banned her from his country now looked at her with the desperation of a father watching his child die. "Can you save him?" Omar Sr. asked, his voice breaking. Amara looked through the window at Hassan's still form, machines keeping him alive, and felt the weight of 15 years settling on her shoulders. The girl who had once served his family tea now held his life in her hands. "I'll let you know after my examination," she said, but as she prepared to enter Hassan's room, to touch him again after all these years, Amara realized that saving his life might be easier than protecting her own heart from the man who had let her walk away once before. The surgery would test her skills as a physician. Seeing him again would test everything else. Amara stood outside Hassan's room for a full minute before entering, her hand resting on the door handle as she gathered her composure. Through the glass, she could see the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, the green lines dancing across multiple monitors, the mechanical breathing apparatus that was keeping him alive. 15 years of preparation had brought her to this moment. 15 years of studying, training, perfecting her craft, building walls around her heart thick enough to withstand any emotional assault. But as she finally pushed open the door and stepped into the sterile space where Hassan lay dying, she realized that no amount of preparation could have readied her for this. "Dr. Okafor?" Yasmin al-Rashid looked up from her vigil beside Hassan's bed. Up close, she was even more beautiful than in the society photographs. Porcelain skin, delicate features, the kind of ethereal elegance that graced magazine covers. But her eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and terror. "Thank you for coming. The doctors here say you're our only hope." Amara nodded professionally, moving to the bank of monitors displaying Hassan's vital signs. Mrs. Al-Rashid, I'll need some time alone with the patient to conduct my examination. Perhaps you could wait outside. Yasmin hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave her husband's side. Can he hear us? The doctors said he might be aware on some level. It's possible, Amara replied, her voice clinically neutral. But right now, I need to focus on his physical condition. After Yasmin reluctantly left, closing the door behind her, Amara was finally alone with Hassan for the first time in 15 years. The silence was broken only by the mechanical sounds of life support and the steady beeping of heart monitors. She approached the bed slowly, her trained eyes taking in every detail of his condition. Hassan's face was pale, his breathing shallow and assisted. Ashoji's snaked from both arms, and the cardiac monitor showed the irregular, struggling rhythm of a heart fighting for survival. "Hello, Hassan," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I suppose you never expected to see me again." She began her examination, her hands moving with practiced precision as she checked his pulse points, assessed his breathing, reviewed the chest tubes and monitors. But as her fingers touched his wrist to check his radial pulse, she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with medicine. His skin was warm, real, alive under her touch. This wasn't just another patient. This was the man who had once held her in a moonlit desert, who had looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, who had promised that money and status didn't matter to him. "Your heart is broken, Hassan," she murmured as she reviewed his cardiac catheterization films on the digital display. "But then, you've always been good at breaking hearts, haven't you?" The damage was extensive. A massive anterior wall myocardial infarction with involvement of multiple coronary vessels. The left anterior descending artery was completely blocked. The right coronary artery had significant stenosis, and there was evidence of papillary muscle rupture that would require complex reconstruction. But it was operable, difficult, risky, requiring techniques that pushed the boundaries of cardiac surgery, but possible. The question wasn't whether she could save him, it was whether she wanted to. "Dr. Okafor?" Dr. Khalil had entered quietly, his expression anxious. "What's your assessment?" Amara straightened, her professional demeanor sliding back into place like armor. "The damage is severe but not inoperable. He'll need immediate surgery, multiple, bypass grafts, valve repair, and reconstruction of the damaged muscle tissue." Relief flooded Khalil's face. "So you'll do it? You'll operate?" "The surgery carries significant risks," Amara continued, ignoring his question. "Even if successful, recovery will be lengthy and uncertain. There's a 30% chance he won't survive the procedure, and a 50% chance of serious complications, even if he does." Khalil's face paled. "But without surgery, he'll be dead within 48 hours. The brutal honesty of her. Words hung in the air between them. Khalil stared at his unconscious brother, then back at Amara. "We'll take those odds," he said finally. "When can you operate?" Amara studied Hassan's face, peaceful in unconsciousness, free from the weight of expectations and responsibilities that had shaped his life. "I need to assemble my surgical team. The operation will take 8 to 10 hours, and I'll require very specific equipment and support staff. Whatever you need, cost is no object." "This isn't about money, Dr. Al-Rashid." Amara's voice carried an edge that made Khalil step back slightly. "This is about whether your brother deserves to live after the choices he's made." Khalil's eyes widened with understanding. He knew exactly what she was referring to. "Amara, Dr. Okafor, I know what happened 15 years ago was wrong. We were wrong. If I could change it, but you can't." Amara cut him off. "You can't undo the humiliation, the exile, the years of having to prove that I was worth more than you believed. You can't give me back the life you stole when you decided I wasn't good enough for your family. Khalil's composure cracked. You're right. We were cruel, prejudiced, and blind. But Hassan, he's paid for that decision every day since you left. He's never been the same, really. Amara's laugh was bitter, because from what I can see, he's done quite well for himself. Beautiful wife, successful business, everything exactly as your family planned. You don't understand. I understand. Perfectly. Amara moved toward the door. I'll operate tomorrow morning. Not because he deserves it, and not because your family has suddenly developed a conscience. I'll do it because I'm a doctor, and I save lives regardless of whether those lives are worth saving. Amara stood on the balcony of the luxury suite. The hospital had provided, looking out over the glittering Dubai skyline. The city never slept, its lights creating a constellation of ambition and excess that stretched to the horizon. Somewhere in those lights was the Al Rashid mansion, where she had once served tea and fallen in love with an impossible dream. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Elizabeth Carter back in Baltimore. Saw the news about you taking the Dubai case. Are you sure about this? Some ghosts are better left buried. Elizabeth was one of the few people who knew about Amara's past, about the real reason she pushed herself so relentlessly, about the man who had inspired both her greatest heartbreak and her most ambitious dreams. Amara typed back, "Some ghosts need to be exorcised." She was about to go inside when she heard voices in the hallway. Yasmin and Omar Sr. speaking in hushed tones outside Hassan's room. "She looks familiar," Omar Sr. was saying. "Dr. Okafor. There's something about her." "You're imagining things." "Father," Yasmin replied, exhaustion clear in her voice, "you're under tremendous stress." "No, I know that face, those eyes. I've seen her before." Amara pressed herself against the wall, listening. "The important thing is that she can save Hassan," Yasmin continued. "Dr. Mitchell says she's performed miracles, saved patients that others gave up on. If anyone can bring my husband back to me, it's her." "Your husband," Omar Sr. repeated quietly. "Yasmin, there's something you should know about Hassan, about his past." "Father, please, not now. I can't handle any more complications." Their footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving Amara alone with the weight of her decision. In a few hours, she would hold Hassan's life in her hands, literally cutting open his chest and repairing the organ that had once belonged to her. But first she needed to see him one more time. The ICU was quiet, except for the constant symphony of medical equipment. Amara slipped into Hassan's room, expecting to find him alone, but stopped short when she saw Yasmin asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand still clutching his. Even in sleep, Yasmin's face showed the strain of the past 3 days. This was a woman who genuinely loved her husband, who was terrified of losing him. Whatever Hassan's faults, whatever mistakes he'd made, this woman's grief was real and heartbreaking. Amara approached the bed quietly, studying Hassan's face in the dim light. He looked vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. The powerful businessman reduced to a patient fighting for survival. "You know," she whispered, "I used to imagine this moment. What I would say to you if I ever saw you again. I had speeches prepared, accusations, demands for explanations. But now—" She trailed off, watching the mechanical rise and fall of his chest. "Now I just want to understand how you could let me go so easily, how you could watch me walk away and not fight for what we had." Hassan's eyelids fluttered slightly, and for a moment Amara thought he might be waking up, but he remained unconscious, lost in whatever dreams or nightmares occupied the space between life and death. "I became everything I am today because you made me feel worthless," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "Every surgery I've mastered, every life I've saved, every barrier I've broken, it was all to prove that you were wrong about me. That I was worth more than you could see. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Tomorrow, I'm going to save your life. Not because I forgive you, and not because I still love you. I'm going to save you because the woman you dismissed as not good enough is now the only person in the world skilled enough to put your broken heart back together. Yasmin stirred in her chair but didn't wake. Amara straightened, her decision made. When you wake up, Hassan al-Rashid, you're going to owe your life to the poor girl from Lagos who wasn't worthy of your family's name, and maybe then you'll understand. What you threw away 15 years ago. She turned to leave, but at the door she looked back one more time. Sleep well, Hassan. Tomorrow we find out if your heart is strong enough to survive what I'm about to do to it. As she walked back to her suite, Amara felt a strange sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring the most challenging surgery of her career and the final confrontation with her past. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The girl who had once served tea was about to save the life of the man who had let her go. And in doing so, she would finally be free. Operating theatre was a cathedral of modern medicine. Its pristine white walls and gleaming equipment creating an atmosphere of sterile perfection. Dr. Amara Okafor stood at the scrub station, methodically washing her hands with the ritualistic precision of a surgeon preparing for the most important operation of her career. Through the observation window, she could see Hassan's unconscious form being prepared by the surgical team. The anesthesiologist was making final adjustments to the ventilator settings while nurses positioned monitoring equipment around the table. In a few minutes, she would make the first incision into the chest of the man who had once held her heart. Dr. Okafor? Dr. James Park, her resident who had flown in from Baltimore at her request, appeared beside her at the scrub station. The family is asking for a final update before we begin. Amara nodded, her hands moving automatically through the familiar ritual of surgical preparation. Tell them the procedure will take approximately 8 hours. They should prepare for a long wait. And if they ask about his chances, tell them the truth. It's going to be touch and go. As Amara entered the operating theatre, the atmosphere shifted. The nurses and technicians straightened, their casual chatter falling to respectful silence. Dr. Amara Okafor commanded that kind of respect. Her reputation for surgical miracles preceded her into every room she entered. But as she looked down, at Hassan's exposed chest, marked with surgical guidelines in blue ink, she felt anything but confident. This wasn't just another high-risk cardiac procedure. This was the culmination of 15 years of pain, growth, and transformation. Patient is prepped and ready, Dr. Okafor, announced Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who was serving as her assistant surgeon. All monitoring systems are optimal. Amara picked up the scalpel, its weight familiar and reassuring in her hand. Beginning incision. The blade cut through skin and tissue with surgical precision, each movement deliberate and controlled. But as she worked to expose Hassan's heart, Amara's mind drifted to another time, another life, when she had watched this same man work with papers and calculations spread across his desk. "Bovie for hemostasis," she called out, her voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside her. The heart, when finally exposed, was a devastated landscape of damaged tissue and blocked vessels. The anterior wall showed the dark discoloration of dead muscle, while the coronary arteries were narrowed by years of stress and genetic predisposition. "Jesus," Dr. Park whispered, looking at the extent of the damage. "How is this man still alive?" "Sheer stubbornness," Amara replied dryly, beginning the delicate process of connecting Hassan to the heart-lung bypass machine. "It's a family trait." Above the surgical theatre, behind soundproof glass, the Al-Rashid family maintained their vigil. Yasmin sat clutching a tissue, her eyes never leaving the surgical table where her husband's chest lay open. Beside her, Omar, Senior, paced restlessly, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. Khalil stood at the window, watching Dr. Amara Okafor work with a mixture of awe and growing recognition. There was something hauntingly familiar about her movements, her posture, the way she commanded the operating room with quiet authority. "She's incredible," Yasmin whispered, watching Amara's hands move with balletic precision inside Hassan's chest cavity. "Look how calm she is, how confident." "She reminds me of someone," Omar Sr. murmured, pressing closer to the glass. "Those hands, that grace, I've seen it before." Khalil's face had gone pale. He was remembering a young woman from years past, the way she had moved through their mansion with quiet dignity, the intelligence that had shone in her eyes when she had solved Hassan's business problems. But surely it couldn't be. "Father," Khalil said quietly, "what was the name of that girl, the one Hassan was involved with years ago?" Omar Sr. turned sharply. "What are you talking about?" "The student, the one from Nigeria, the one you sent away." "Amara," Omar Sr. said slowly, the name feeling strange on his lips after so many years. "Her name was Amara Okafor." The silence that followed was deafening. All three family members stared down at the surgeon who held Hassan's life in her hands, the terrible truth finally sinking in. "It's her," Yasmin said, her voice barely a whisper. "The woman Hassan loved before me. She's saving his life." 4.5 hours into the surgery, Amara was deep in the most challenging phase of the procedure. She had successfully completed 3 bypass grafts, rerouting blood around the blocked coronary arteries, but now faced the delicate task of repairing the damaged papillary muscle that controlled one of Hassan's heart valves. "Suction here," she called out, her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked in the tight space of Hassan's chest cavity. "I need better visualization of the posterior wall." The surgery was going well, but it was far from over. Each suture had to be perfect, each reconnection of blood vessels flawless. One mistake could mean the difference between Hassan waking up healthy or never waking up at all. "Dr. Okafor," Dr. Mitchell observed, "your technique on this valve repair is extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it." "Necessity breeds innovation," Amara replied, her hands never pausing in their intricate work. "When you're determined to save a life, you find ways to do the impossible." But as she worked, memories kept flooding back. Hassan teaching her about business strategy late into the night. The way his eyes had lit up when she had solved a complex logistics problem. The moment in the library when he had almost kissed her, when the world had seemed full of infinite possibility. "Doctor?" Dr. Park's voice was concerned. "Your heart rate is elevated. Are you feeling all right?" Amara realized she had been holding her breath. "I'm fine. Continue monitoring." She forced herself to focus entirely on the surgery, pushing aside 15 years of emotions to concentrate on the delicate work before her. Hassan's heart was responding well to the repairs, but the most dangerous part was yet to come. Weaning him off the bypass machine and seeing if his damaged heart could function on its own. 7 hours into the surgery, Amara was nearing the final phase. The bypasses were complete, the valve had been successfully repaired, and the damaged muscle tissue had been reconstructed using revolutionary techniques she had pioneered. Now came the moment of truth. "Preparing to come off bypass," she announced to the surgical team. "Everyone ready?" The tension in the room was palpable as the heart-lung machine was gradually reduced, forcing Hassan's repaired heart to take over the work of pumping blood through his body. For a few terrifying moments, the organ struggled, its rhythm irregular and weak. "Come on," Amara whispered, her hands gently massaging Hassan's heart to encourage it to find its rhythm. "You've never given up on anything in your life. Don't start Now, slowly, gradually, Hassan's heart began to beat with increasing strength and regularity. The monitors showed improving blood pressure, stable oxygen levels, and the strong, steady rhythm of a heart determined to survive. "We have a good rhythm," Dr. Park announced, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "Blood pressure is stabilizing." Amara allowed herself a small smile as she began the process of closing Hassan's chest. The surgery had been successful, but the real test would come when he woke up. If he woke up. As Amara placed the final sutures in Hassan's chest, closing the incision that had given her access to his heart, she felt a strange sense of completion. She had literally held his heart in her hands, repaired the damage, and given him a chance at life. But more than that, she had faced her own past and emerged victorious. The girl who had been deemed unworthy 15 years ago had just performed one of the most complex cardiac surgeries ever attempted in the Middle East. "Surgery complete," she announced to the room. "Patient is stable and ready for transfer to the cardiac ICU." As the surgical team began preparing Hassan for transport, Amara stepped back from the table and pulled off her surgical gloves. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm, but inside she felt hollowed out, emotionally drained by the intensity of the past 8 hours. "Dr. Okafor." Dr. Mitchell approached her as they left the operating theatre. "That was absolutely masterful. I've been practicing cardiac surgery for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished." "Thank you," Amara replied quietly. "Now we wait and see if his heart is as strong as his stubbornness." Hassan lay in the cardiac intensive care unit, still unconscious but breathing on his own, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of a man clinging to life. The monitors around his bed showed strong vital signs: blood pressure stable, heart rhythm regular, oxygen levels optimal. Amara stood at the foot of his bed, still in her surgical scrubs, watching the man she had just saved fight his way back to consciousness. The surgery had been a complete success, but recovery would be a long and uncertain process. "Dr. Okafor?" She turned to find Yasmin approaching, her face streaked with tears, but glowing with gratitude and relief. "I don't know how to thank you," Yasmin said, her voice breaking with emotion. "You've given me my husband back, given our children their father. I'll never be able to repay you for what you've done." Amara looked at this woman who had everything she herself had once wanted: Hassan's name, his ring, his children, his future. But instead of resentment, she felt only compassion for another woman who had nearly lost the man she loved. "He's not out of danger yet," Amara said gently. "The next 72 hours are critical, but if he continues to respond this well, he should make a full recovery." Can I sit with him?" "Of course, talk to him. Sometimes patients can hear more than we realize." As Yasmin took her place beside Hassan's bed, Amara prepared to leave. Her work here was done. She had saved his life, proved her worth, and finally laid to rest the ghosts that had haunted her for 15 years. But as she reached the door, Hassan's voice, weak but unmistakable, stopped her in her tracks. "Amara." She turned slowly to find Hassan's eyes open, unfocused but aware, looking directly at her. After 15 years, Hassan al-Rashid was looking at her again, and this time she was the one with all the power. "Hello, Hassan," she said quietly. "Welcome back to the world of the living." The intensive care unit was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft whoosh of ventilators. Most patients were sleeping, fighting their battles in the peaceful darkness of medicated rest. But Hassan al-Rashid was wide awake, staring at the ceiling with eyes that held 15 years of regret. Amara had left hours ago, but her presence lingered in the room like a ghost. He kept replaying that moment when their eyes had met, the shock of recognition, the weight of unspoken history, the terrible irony that the woman he had lost was now the one who had saved his life. "Can't sleep?" Hassan turned his head slowly, mindful of the surgical incisions and monitoring wires. Khalil stood in the doorway, looking older than his years, his physician's coat wrinkled from the long vigil. "Every time I close my eyes, I see her hands," Hassan said, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed only hours earlier. "Operating on my heart, saving my life." Khalil entered the room and took the chair beside the bed. "She's extraordinary, isn't she? The woman she's become." "She always was extraordinary," Hassan replied quietly. "We were just too blind to see it." The brothers sat in silence for a moment, both lost in memories of a young woman who had served their family with grace and dignity, only to be cast out when her worth became inconvenient. "Hassan," Khalil said finally, "there's something you need to know about why I told Father about you and Amara all those years ago." Hassan turned to look at his brother, seeing something in Khalil's expression he'd never noticed before. Shame, deep and corrosive. "I was jealous," Khalil continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "You had found something real, something I'd never experienced. Love that wasn't about status or connections or business advantages, and I couldn't stand it." "Khalil, let me finish." Khalil's hands were shaking slightly. "I convinced myself I was protecting the family reputation, maintaining our standards. But the truth is, I was envious that my younger brother had discovered something I thought was impossible, genuine connection with another human being." Hassan stared at his brother, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. "You destroyed my happiness because you couldn't find your own?" "Yes." The admission seemed to physically pain Khalil. "And in doing so, I destroyed something beautiful, something rare." Before Hassan could respond, they heard soft footsteps in the corridor. Through the glass wall, they could see Dr. Amara Okafor making her rounds, checking on post-operative patients with the dedication that had made her legendary in medical circles. "She does this every night," Khalil observed, "checks on all her patients personally, even when she's not required to. The nursing staff says they've never seen anything like her commitment." Hassan watched Amara move from room to room, her presence bringing comfort to patients and families alike. She had grown into everything he had always known she could become: brilliant, compassionate, unstoppable. "I need to talk to her," Hassan said suddenly. "Hassan, you're barely 12 hours post-surgery. You need rest." "I've had 15 years to rest from the biggest mistake of my life," Hassan interrupted, struggling to sit up despite the pain in his chest. "I'm not waiting any longer." Amara was reviewing a patient's chart when she heard her name called. She turned to see Hassan, standing in the doorway of his room, one hand pressed against his chest, his hospital gown testament to his vulnerability. "Mr. Al-Rashid, you should be in bed," she said, immediately shifting into physician mode. "You're risking your sutures." "I'll risk more than that if I don't say what I need to say to you," Hassan replied, taking a careful step into the corridor. They stood facing each other in the dimly lit hallway, two people who had once shared dreams and stolen kisses, now separated by 15 years and completely different lives. "You saved my life," Hassan said simply. "I'm a doctor. It's what I do." "No." Hassan shook his head. "You could have refused the case. You could have recommended another surgeon. You could have let me die, and no one would have blamed you." Amara's professional mask slipped slightly. "Did you want me to let you die?" "Part of me did," Hassan admitted. "Part of me thought I deserved it after what I let happen to you." "What you let happen?" Amara's voice carried 15 years of buried anger. "You didn't just let it happen, Hassan. You chose it. You chose your family's approval over fighting for us." "You're right," Hassan said. the words cutting through him like surgical steel. I was a coward. I was 22 years old, terrified of disappointing my father, and I let the woman I loved walk away rather than risk everything for her. The fuck? Woman you loved, Amara repeated, her voice hollow. You had a funny way of showing it. I've regretted it every day since, Hassan said, taking another step toward her. Every board meeting, every business success, every moment of the life I built after you left, it all felt empty because you weren't there to share it. You married someone else. I married the woman my family chose, yes, and I've spent 11 years trying to convince myself I was happy. Amara stared at him, seeing not the powerful businessman, but the broken man who had just survived the most traumatic experience of his life. Are you happy? Hassan was quiet for a long moment. Yasmin is a good woman. She deserves better than a man who's been in love with a ghost for 15 years. I'm not a ghost, Hassan. I'm a flesh and blood woman who built a life without you. I know, and what a life you've built. Hassan's eyes filled with admiration and pain. You became everything I always knew you could be. Everything I was too young and stupid to fight for when it mattered. They found themselves in the small interfaith chapel on the hospital's ground floor, sitting in opposite pews like strangers, seeking solace. The space was peaceful, lit by soft lighting that cast gentle shadows on the walls. Tell me about your life, Hassan said. The real one, not what I can read in medical journals. Amara was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. I cried for 3 months after I left Dubai, not just from heartbreak, but from humiliation. Your father made me feel like I was nothing, like I had been foolish to dream I could ever be worthy of his son. Hassan winced, but she continued. Then I got angry. Really, truly angry. And I used that anger to fuel everything. My studies, my research, my determination to become someone who could never be dismissed or sent away again. You succeeded. Yes, I did. I became one of the best cardiac surgeons in the world. I've saved thousands of lives, pioneered new techniques, taught at the most prestigious medical schools. I have money, respect, influence, everything your family thought I could never achieve. But Hassan sensed there was more. Amara smiled sadly. But I've been alone through all of it. I threw myself so completely into becoming someone worthy that I forgot how to let anyone close enough to love me. There's been no one. There have been men who were interested, yes, good men, accomplished men. But I could never let them in. I was too afraid of being vulnerable again, too afraid of being found lacking. Hassan felt the weight of what his rejection had cost her. Not just the immediate pain, but years of isolation and guardedness. I'm sorry, he said, the words feeling inadequate. I'm so deeply sorry for what I did to you, for what I cost you. I know you are, Amara replied. But sorry doesn't give me back 15 years, Hassan. Sorry doesn't undo the damage. They sat, in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. What happens now? Hassan asked finally. Amara looked at him, this man who had shaped her life in ways he couldn't imagine, who had broken her heart and inadvertently forged her into steel. Now you recover, she said. You go back to your wife and your life. And you try to be a better man than you were 15 years ago. And you? I go back to Baltimore, back to my patients, my research, my life. She paused. But first, I'm going home to Lagos to see my mother. She's in her 70s now, and I've spent too many years trying to prove myself instead of simply loving the people who matter. Hassan nodded, understanding that this was goodbye. Real goodbye this time. Amara, he said as she stood to leave. I want you to know, loving you, losing you, it taught me what really matters in life. I may have been too young to fight for it then, but I learned. And I hope you can find happiness. Real happiness. You deserve so much more than the world has given you. Amara looked down at him, this man who had once held her heart, now fragile and humbled by his brush with mortality. "Hassan," she said softly, "I forgive you. Not for your sake, but for mine. I'm tired of carrying that anger. It served its purpose, but I don't need it anymore." She turned to leave, then paused at the chapel door. "Take care of that heart," she said. "It's been through enough." 2 days later, Dr. Amara Okafor stood in the first-class lounge, waiting for her flight back to Baltimore. Hassan's recovery was progressing remarkably well. He would live and live fully, thanks to her skill and the second chance she had given him. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown Dubai number. "The girl from Lagos saved my life. Thank you for showing me what strength really looks like. I hope you find the love you deserve." Amara smiled, tucked her phone away, and boarded her flight. She had come to Dubai as the girl who had been rejected and dismissed. She was leaving as the woman who had held power over life and death, who had proven her worth beyond any doubt. But more importantly, she was leaving free from the anger that had driven her, free from the need to prove herself to anyone, free to build a life based on love rather than the absence of it. 6 months later, Dr. Amara Okafor would open a free cardiac clinic in Lagos, bringing world-class medical care to the community that had shaped her. Hassan al-Rashid would establish a foundation funding medical education for underprivileged students across Africa, naming it in honor of a brilliant young woman who had once served tea in his father's house. They would never see each other again, but the impact of their reunion would ripple outward, saving countless lives and creating opportunities for young people who dreamed of rising above their circumstances. The poor girl from Lagos had returned home as a surgeon, having saved the heart of the man who broke hers. In doing so, she had finally healed her own. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in claiming what was taken from you, but in becoming so much more than anyone ever imagined you could be. And sometimes, saving someone else's life is the key to reclaiming your own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.